After weeks of dealing with the dangerous avian flu, Keystone Park is starting to return to a sense of normalcy. Unfortunately, hints of the pathogen still remain in several of our birds, who are still undergoing daily treatment to hopefully save their lives. Thankfully, a majority of our king penguin flock have passed quarantine inspections and have been given the all-clear to return to their habitat. The exhibit currently remains closed, as many of the birds need time to de-stress, build up strength, and return to a sense of schedule. We were able to act quickly and accordingly thanks to our partnership with Whispering Woods Wildlife Haven. We've partnered and worked with their owner, Genevieve Joyce, several times in the past, but for reasons far less dire. The flock of American flamingos they've recently brought in were also carrying the pathogen, and our zoos had to share research, studies, and other information in order to rapidly find a cure to save the birds' lives. Thanks to the long hours and hard work put in by both staff teams, we've so far been successful, and things are trending in the right direction for both facilities. The work, however, is still far from being finished, and there are animals in both locations that are still at risk. Together, though, we're incredibly confident that we're going to be able to bring a swift end to this avian flu outbreak any day now. In the wake of the local pandemics, especially after nearly losing some of our beloved zoo members, we at Keystone Park began to think about conservation on a much larger scale. Pair this with the slight renovations we've recently been working on near the zoo's entrance, and a beautiful idea began to blossom. We constructed a very simple garden for migratory butterflies passing through the Midwest, and have already documented frequent use by a variety of different species. The butterflies aren't enclosed in any way in this habitat, and are free to stay as long or as little as they choose before continuing on their migratory path. Between the recent plaza and entrance renovations, the butterfly garden, and battling the avian influenza, Keystone Park is starting to run low on funds. Unfortunately, we've had to temporarily pause construction on Polar Point, our most recent expansion to the zoo, as a result of these financial troubles. Before construction was halted, we had two projects underway at Polar Point, the first of which was stopped well before completion due to its close proximity to the king penguin habitat. Since the outbreak of avian influenza appears to be on the downward trend at Keystone Park, we're expecting to get the green light to continue construction on Polar Point within the next couple of weeks. The other project was seen to completion, and is our most recent addition to the zoo. The Arctic fox enclosure is not only a wonderful habitat for 3 mischievous foxes, but also has a fully functional gift shop inside, with new merchandise themed around the new section to be. Despite the grand opening of Polar Point being temporarily delayed, with an opening date not yet having been chosen, this is still projected to be one of our more popular sections at the zoo. Thankfully, the Arctic fox habitat truly started things off strong, and is one of the more intricate habitats to date, featuring outdoor, indoor, and even completely hidden sections. There's certainly plenty of different areas for the foxes to explore. Arctic fox are incredibly prone to being stressed, and that was of utmost concern when building this enclosure. Matter of fact, we've yet to open the habitat to the public to give the fox just enough time to adjust to their new home. Once construction on Polar Point has the green light to continue, the Arctic fox trio may have to be temporarily relocated to a different facility. Construction gets loud after all, and loud means stressful. Out of the fox family, Snowball is certainly the least shy out of the three. He typically can be found outside enjoying the sun and fresh air. Snowflake is the polar, get it, opposite of Snowball. She's typically quick to flee and is often found alone, especially in the private quarters. Wisteria enjoys foraging for scraps around the habitat and is constantly digging around. Matter of fact, we actually had to reinforce the bottom of the enclosure with additional concrete layers to account for her many different escape attempts. Due to their naturally high stress levels, our Arctic fox trio has been under constant supervision by our staff. As a result, they've become quite attached and will make an excellent addition to Keystone Park's roster. Another issue we've noticed recently at Keystone Park is an extreme lack of retention among our younger guests. While conservation and education are two of our core values that we hold on a very high pedestal, the sad truth is that this isn't appealing to a younger crowd. They crave two things: entertainment and action, above all else. Thankfully, entertaining the youth is easy enough, and relatively cheap at the same time. We constructed a simple yet effective playground for the children to play on right at the front of the zoo, and it's far enough away from any animals that are prone to loud noises and stress. This playground was graciously donated to Keystone Park by Edgar Poe Wong, and if you'd like to build a similar playground in your zoo, the blueprint is on the workshop right now. It's an incredible build, and I really highly recommend it. We're almost positive that this is going to be an immense hit with the smaller zoo guest, and that's not the only trick we have up our sleeve. If you'd like to find out what else we have planned, be sure to stay tuned. If you are interested in receiving zoo insider information well before it goes public, consider becoming a zoo member. Not only do you get access to videos the second that they're complete, but you'll also get your name in writing forever placed in Keystone Park. I seriously can't thank you enough for the support, but now I'm thinking it's time to get into what our members already know. We have a fairly large expansion on our horizon, and we should probably get started. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We need comments more than ever today because we have a lot of animals to name. Your endless support truly is what gives me the motivation to keep going every week, and I honestly can't thank you enough. By engaging with the video in any way at all, you're telling YouTube to push the video to more people, and the more people that watch, the more videos I can make, so everybody wins in the end. Today we're going to be taking a short break from Polar Point and constructing a brand new petting zoo. The basic shape of the build has already been laid out, but the most important part of any petting zoo is obviously the animals that go inside of it. Today at Keystone Park, we're going to be building for the Alpine goat, Hill Radnor sheep, American Standard donkey, Sussex chicken, and the Tamsworth pig. All of these species are listed as domesticated and thus don't even have an IUCN rating. No breeding programs are going to be necessary, but I have a feeling we're going to have some offspring anyways. There's going to be 3 separate habitats in this petting zoo, the first of which is going to be shared between the Alpine goat and the Hill Radnor sheep. Luckily, both of these species only need land requirement in their habitat. Nothing else is involved. Whenever building a habitat with cohabitation, it's always important to make sure the temperature requirement as well as the boundary requirement add up. Just like the world we live in, the Zoopedia is ever-changing, and under the Species tab there's a new section added. Due to advancements in zoo research, we can now tell if guests will be able to interact with species or not. Both the Alpine goat and the Hill Radnor sheep share this characteristic. The American Standard donkey is also able to interact with guests, however they're also prone to aggressive outbursts, so this is going to be the one exhibit in the petting zoo that the guests are going to have to stay out of. Despite the donkey having cohabitation with the Hill Radnor sheep, they're going to have to share separate habitats. The American Standard donkey is going to be by itself. They're solitary animals after all. This is going to make the second habitat of the petting zoo. The final habitat is going to be shared between the Sussex chicken and the Tamsworth pig. Both of these species happen to share cohabitation with each other, so it's a perfect way to round out the petting zoo. Unlike the American Standard donkey enclosure, guests will be able to interact and enter this habitat with the chicken and the pig. On paper, this sounds like by far the most complicated habitat we've ever constructed to date, but it's really quite simple. In summary, it's a habitat between the Alpine goat and the Hill Radnor sheep, a single habitat for the American Standard donkey, and another shared habitat for the Sussex chicken and the Tamsworth pig. 3 habitats total, 5 species. Let's do it! When making more than one habitat, sometimes finding a good starting point can be a bit daunting, but there's one thing that every farm or petting zoo needs. A classic red barn is an absolute staple of these locations, and we're going to be using the stained wood from the aquatic pack to get the exact right color. These barns are a relatively old design, so the structure isn't complicated, it's just a simple square or rectangle. Once the basic foundation is laid, you immediately have to start thinking about the roof. The roofs hang over the side quite a bit on these classic red barns, so it's imperative to do this step now. As for the roof, we're going basic yet again with the classic asphalt. I like the look of the red on the gray, and we're going to add a nice white trim to blend them together later in the build. Because this red barn is rather square, we're building this entire section on the grid. It makes things a lot easier and more efficient to put together. The key to making these barns work is you have to change up the angle of the roof. We went with a 4-meter slope at first, and then eased into a 1-meter slope. Eventually we're going to go with no slope at all and just a flat roof on top. Just because you're building on the grid and everything is in the same group doesn't necessarily mean you can't separate things from the main group. This is exactly what we did with the roof, to make sure that we could move it exactly how we wanted it, so there wasn't a crazy overhang on one side. Unfortunately, it still didn't really look right in my opinion, so we came in with some pieces that were off the grid, using the exact same color and texture of the wood, just to fill in the little gaps. Hopefully now with the barn in place, you should be able to get a rough idea of where the exhibits are going to be in this habitat. If you can't tell, the Alpine goat and the Radnor sheep are going to be here, the Sussex chicken and the Tamsworth pig here, and the American Standard donkey is going to kick out to the right. The only thing I'm not too sold on right now is the shaping of the barn. It feels a bit too square, which I get was the point, but I think we can add another addition to the left side to also help the animals once they're in the habitat. We're going to be making some simple farm stalls, and this is a really easy build. Effectively all we're doing is the exact same techniques we used to make the barn, but we're making it smaller and only doing 1/2. Definitely a vast improvement. The barn isn't just a simple square anymore, and the Alpine goat and the Hill Radnor sheep are also going to have a backstage to escape to in case they don't want to be pet currently, and if they do, they can always come back. In order to make a petting zoo, the first thing that you're going to have to add is this small guest gate. This can connect to paths, and if you want a realistic look of terrain, you can use the null path and paint over it later. Despite it not looking like a normal path made of asphalt or concrete, this is in fact the normal path that guests can walk on. In the confines of the petting zoo, guests vaguely will follow the path, but also have the ability to venture off and do their own thing. Once the path is placed, come in with a barrier and connect it to either side of the guest gate. In this build, I'm using the null barrier because I have a cool idea for the enclosure, but any barrier will do. Just because you have the guest gate, you're also going to need a habitat gate. You're going to have 2 entrances, one for the public and one for the staff. Upon clicking the habitat gate, you'll then scroll over to the very end of all of your options and see a new UI. In order to get guests into your habitat, you're going to need 4 things: a guest gate, a hygiene station, no dangerous animals, and at least one interactive animal that guests can interact with according to the Zoopedia. If you'll recall, the Zoopedia clearly states this in the bottom section of the social requirements. Now that we know precisely what to do to make this habitat functional and look good, I think we can act. Since we utilized the null barrier to make this habitat's perimeters, we're going to have to make a custom fence and lay it around the edges of the habitat to keep the animals in. Defining boundaries is going to make the rest of the build easier. Let's start here. By custom fence, I meant pre-built from the construction menu. I still think it looks quite nice. This is from the Barnyard Pack, the latest DLC released to Planet Zoo Console Edition. We're going to be using plenty of different details and parts from the Barnyard Pack, and that's where all of the animals in today's habitat are coming from. But for now, I simply laid the entire perimeter of the habitat following the null barrier with the rustic wood fence. This didn't only apply to the outside, we also came inside the barn to make barriers between the backstage as well as the guest viewing. Covering up the habitat gate wasn't the easiest thing ever. We had to come back in with the exact same stained wood color that we'd used before to make the perimeter of the barn, but build up another pillar on the inside. Now that we have the fence for one of the 3 habitats completely laid out, I think we need to carry this momentum on and work on the other 2. Luckily, the habitat that we just made was about the size of the other 2 combined, so these ones should be much easier. To get a slight change of scenery, I want to start with the American Standard donkey. Half of this habitat is inside, which contrasts the other 2 species. Since we separated the roof from the rest of the barn, I'm simply going to move it over here for the time being, just so it's a bit brighter when we're building. We had an absolutely massive space in this barn, and I wasn't really sure what to fill it with. I had the idea then to put a keeper hut in here, because this is all going to be one area on the work zone, so the keeper hut is going to really help with workplace efficiency. We're certainly not going to get to it in this episode, but I'd really like to one day build a greenhouse back here to actually explain where the crops from Keystone Park are coming from. Once the keeper hut was placed, we could add in the habitat gate immediately after. We used the exact same trick of the null barrier, and then replacing it with the rustic fence from the Barnyard Pack. I noticed that the habitat was a bit small, significantly smaller than the first one in fact, so I came back in with the exact same stained wood pieces from the aquatic pack that we used to make the front facade of the barn. I used these to make a very small door that the American Standard donkey will be able to use to get out into his outdoor portion of the habitat. Naturally, to keep everything uniform and the same, we used the exact same rustic wood fence pieces. Afterwards, I laid a layer of limestone above the path so we could easily detail it later on in the build process. The inside of the build is certainly starting to take shape. I really like how it's turning out. We're going to have to add a lot of details in, but we'll do that in due time. The outside of the build is suffering from the exact same issue. I think the shaping is quite nice and almost as perfect as it can get for the build I wanted to accomplish, but we need details. 2 of the 3 habitats are firmly locked in place, and we need a 3rd. Right now, however, I think the build desperately needs trims more than anything else. It's really important. Take note of how plain and admittedly boring the exterior of the barn looks. The shaping's perfect, but there's nothing drawing your eyes to it. In order to accomplish this, we need to add some wooden trims to the outside. The pieces I chose to use were simply the base game Planet Zoo wood beams. I recolored them to be as white as possible. What we're going to do now is place these absolutely everywhere in the build. Every single corner, every single roof, every single area where there could be a wood trim, we're going to place a wood trim. Getting the exact angles on some of these can be a bit tricky. You have to take this seriously, otherwise it's going to be geometrically imperfect later on and complicate something down the road. It's certainly a time-consuming process, but the end result is well worth it. Trims of any color truly do make the build pop and stand out a lot more, but white really add that extra flair. The white looked so good, in fact, I decided to make the front of the build stand out even more by adding a few more white details. I added a couple of windows, as well as a big banner displaying a logo. For now I just put in the Planet Zoo as a placeholder. This certainly looks much better, however typically when I build one detail, I immediately think of another and have to add that right away. The same thing happened here. Even though these doors aren't necessarily functional, I still think it looks realistic to add them to the barn where they would be. The unsung hero of this door detail was surprisingly the Twilight Pack. It had a lock, as well as door openers that I put on either side. I also utilized the Twilight door frames to add a trim around the detail. Not every single trim in this build has to be white, but I wanted to make it smooth. I think I'm finally happy with how the barn looks, but the problem is the outside, but especially the inside is a bit bare. I think we can change that. Detailing such a large space can always seem daunting at first, but there are a few easy tricks to limit the workload and make it all go a little bit quicker. The first thing that I always like to do is make a detail that's a little bit more intricate and has a lot more effort put into it than anything else in the build. For example, right now, I want to build hand washing stations right outside of the entrance to the petting zoo. In order to accomplish this, we're going to have to use a variety of different pieces and get creative with some of the angles. Another thing that's really easy to get creative with is color. For example, right now we're using this moss decal from the Europe pack, but recolored to a lighter blue to fit the water in the trough. I then added the special effects water jet to make it appear that this is constantly running and on so guests can come wash their hands whenever they need. Now that we had the troughs in place, it was really easy to extend the fence out and even plant some crops. From here I came over to the side of the build and added pretty much every scenery piece that I could possibly include from the barnyard pack. All of this stuff was literally designed for a build just like this, and it just came out, so there's no reason not to use all of it. I tried to use the different details in tandem with each other, and what I mean by this is we have the well right here, we have the buckets that you'd use on the well, and you'd have the boxes that can transport the buckets if the buckets get a little heavy. Even though we're more so detailing as opposed to working on foliage, you can never have enough buffalo grass in the habitat. Foliage is a detail in its own right. With enough areas like this, the build is sure to be done in no time at all. I think this looks quite nice. Even though we already made a couple of fake hand washer troughs, a requirement for the walkthrough habitat is a hygiene station, so we're going to be adding it right at the front of the exhibit. I also manipulated the terrain using some rough and coarse sand to make it appear that the path extends naturally over here. Once the path allowed guests to have access, I added in a blueprint shelf that we've used in other places in Keystone Park. I then loaded the shelf with various throwaway boxes. I loaded every single box of something that the goats or the sheep would like to eat. This is where the guests are going to get the food from. If you're unaware, the guests can pet and feed the animals without having this detail around, but it makes the build feel all the more immersive to have it around anyways. It truly is the small areas like this that make builds stand out and feel more immersive. Taking your time and making details that make logical sense truly is my favorite way to play the game and tell a story. And thankfully, there's plenty more story to be told. We're not even close to being done. We need to focus on the interior of the first petting zoo, and for now I thought about adding these walkable PVC curtains in to give the goats and sheep that extra degree of privacy. Focusing on the sheep and goats backstage, I added a lot of habitat bedding all over the floor to make it look more comfortable and to actually goad them to go in here. With the path placement, it was a bit difficult to find places to put the enrichment items, but the scarecrow feeder is going to work perfect right here next to their entrance. I placed other feeders at every single corner of the habitat to try and influence the animals to go absolutely everywhere in the enclosure. Once enrichment items were in place for the animals' entertainment as well as care, I moved on to placing some foliage all over the petting zoo. The foliage overall was basic and easy, but there are a couple of tricks to sell the illusion and make the immersion just right. Effectively, what we're trying to do is place buffalo grass heavier and in bigger patches where the guests and animals are less likely to walk. That means where the soil is matted down, buffalo grass is going to be placed in higher quantities, but where the guests walk, like on the sand, it's going to be sunken into the ground to make it appear like there's less of it. I used creosote bushes for a simple backdrop for now. This might be temporary, it might stay, but for now we just need something behind the fence to make the habitat appear a little bit bigger. It always amazes me how simply using 3 different species of plants can make a build absolutely transform in your eyes. The alpine goat and the hill Radnor sheep are absolutely going to love it here, but we still have 3 more species to build for. The backstage looks especially cozy, but I'm thinking now we need to work on the American Standard donkey habitat. They're going to be neighbors after all. The American Standard donkey habitat is going to be significantly smaller than its goat and sheep neighbor. That being said, it still features an outdoor as well as an indoor portion, so it's a fairly sizable habitat for just one donkey. Starting off with enrichment items, there's not too much space back here, but I added a hanging grazer feeder. If you'll notice, when I try to place the water pipe, even sinking it into the ground, it always morphs the terrain around it, so you can't necessarily sink it into the ground exactly how you think. I recently learned that there is a way to in fact fix this, and it involves the exact same null path we used on the other portion of the petting zoo. If you'll recall, the null path doesn't disrupt the terrain whatsoever. However, if you place enrichment items, even sinking them into the ground over the null path, it actually allows you to do it without morphing the terrain too terribly. On the indoor portion, I gave the donkey a sizable habitat bedding using leaves and straw. I then used a variety of different terrain, including sands, soils, and dirts, to make it appear a lot more natural. Afterwards, I came in with some buffalo grass and used the exact same foliage techniques that we used in the first petting zoo, this time adding in some faux rock sunken into the ground to appear as pebbles. This probably takes the cake for the most basic and simple habitat in all of Keystone Park, but the fact that it has what's likely the most intricate and interactive habitat right next to it, and another interactive one soon to be, I think it works perfectly. The final habitat is actually going to be the first one you have to walk past, and it's going to be for the Sussex chicken and the Tamsworth pig. I already went ahead and added in the guest gate, null barrier, habitat gate, and everything else that we've already gone over. However, we haven't made a chicken coop in today's episode yet, so let's start there. Typically, a chicken coop in real life is built for function over purpose, and chicken are very powerful animals, so usually they're built with very flimsy materials like mesh and wood. The ultimate goal of this chicken coop is going to be to provide an area for the chicken and single pig to escape the guests that want to come into the petting zoo. This was without a doubt the easiest portion of the entire petting zoo, because simply all this is effectively the exact same materials and techniques as the barn, but on a significantly smaller scale. Quite the easy build, but I'm especially proud of how it turned out. I really like how it doubles as almost the back fence of the habitat. The enrichment items in this enclosure were more of the same, simple feeders and a few toys for the animals to experience. There weren't any new techniques used in the foliage either. This is certainly a basic habitat, but like I said before, sometimes basic means better. The ultimate goal of this petting zoo was to provide children with premium and exceptional entertainment upon entering Keystone Park, an area that wouldn't necessarily bore them, but teach them something at the same time. Building an interactive petting zoo is simply a perfect decision to make, and I think we absolutely knocked it out of the park, and this is one of the better builds in all of Keystone Park in general. The last thing that we need to add is arguably the most important, and that's the animals themselves. I think they're on their way now. Let's prepare for their arrival. Welcome to the zoo! The American Standard donkey was the first animal to be introduced into the petting zoo. His personality came out right away, as he quickly explored his entire habitat, gaining a mastery over his small territory. Like usual, if you have any name suggestions for any of the animals featured in today's video, feel free to leave a comment. Our lone male donkey wasn't the only one happy with the habitat. Matter of fact, he was one of the first animals in all of Keystone Park to get an absolute perfect score on his first inspection. The Tamsworth pig and the Sussex chickens were the next animals to join the petting zoo. Unfortunately, our Tamsworth pig has been battling some slight medical issues, however he was just recently released from quarantine. We'll certainly continuously monitor his health, but luckily right now everything appears to be in the green. He shares the habitat with 4 Sussex chicken. We have 3 hens and a single rooster. With the amount of eggs they're projected to lay, I'm sure we'll have some chicks on the way before long at all. Chicken, and especially pigs, are surprisingly intelligent animals, so it didn't take them very long to adjust to their new home at all. During the process of building the petting zoo, we brought on a new keeper. Before her employment at Keystone Park, she was actually a farmer local to the region. She has ample experience dealing with all kinds of farm animals. Typically, this means her application would have been swiftly disposed into the recycling bin. However, in this case, it's perfectly acceptable. We don't need her to deal with our grizzly bears, we just need her to feed the chickens. It was rather telling from her body language, attitude, and posture that she was rather comfortable and confident with the workload she'd been entrusted with. The intelligent animals in this habitat are certainly going to grow to associate the keeper with food, and thus build a beautiful relationship. The Hill Radnor sheep and the Alpine goat were the last animals to arrive to the petting zoo. In terms of the animals in the petting zoo as a whole, these two are certainly the least intelligent species overall. They also have the biggest habitat, so it took them a little bit of time to adjust and get used to it. The hill sheep proved to be a little bit reclusive and antisocial. The goats, however, were the complete opposite, always playing with each other and their enrichment items in the habitat. Thankfully for not being the smartest species, when the food comes out, they don't fight over it, and matter of fact get along quite well. After a few days in their brand new habitat, the Hill Radnor sheep as well as the Alpine goat appeared to be well adjusted and ready for the grand opening of Keystone Park's petting zoo. After weeks of patiently waiting and the petting zoo finally opened to the public, droves of families with lots of children appeared at Keystone Park in record numbers. Clearly eager to learn about and interact with the farm animals, some families even ran to the entrance, which we quickly shut down. That's a safety hazard. Once the families arrived at the petting zoo, it took no time at all to quickly realize that building this facility was a perfect decision. What was truly surprising is that a majority of the children who entered the habitats were incredibly well behaved and treated the animals with the utmost respect that we would expect. Not only were the children on their best behavior, but the animals, especially the sheep and the goats, were incredibly well behaved also. Every single one of the animals in the petting zoo responded rather well to the guests being in their habitat. It was especially impressive later in the day, because the petting zoo got incredibly busy. In the coming days after the studies come out, I would assume that we're going to have to put capacity limits on some of the exhibits. This isn't something that we predicted having to do beforehand, but it's going to be a necessity from now on to protect the well-being of the animals. Overall, the petting zoo is an outstanding and overwhelming success. It brought a lot of new visitors into Keystone Park, and educated the youth, which were our 2 goals when coming in. What was truly special, however, was seeing some of the adults and older members act like the youth. Unfortunately, I do think that's where we're going to have to call it for today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed. I'm not going to lie, this was one of the toughest episodes I ever had to film, mainly because the Wi-Fi at my apartment complex was down the entire week. I'm not going to lie, I'm recording this at Starbucks right now. The support I receive from this wonderful and outstanding community that we've all built together truly is what pushes me through hard times. I seriously can't thank you enough for your continued and endless support. To be able to provide content to this community is an absolute privilege and honor, and something I take very serious. With all that being said, I think that's going to call it for today's episode. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. I know I had fun building it. The Barnyard Pack's awesome. There's only going to be 2 more episodes of Keystone Park before the zoo is entirely done, but that's not to say I'm going anywhere. We have plenty of plans to expand and grow in the future. But until then, Kingpin out. I'll see you next week.